Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our diamond debate of the day. Welcome to Feriel Zerouki, who is well known to everyone, many of us in the industry, through her many years as doing very important and impactful work at De Beers. And today, her primary position is as the president of the World Diamond Council, and very involved and engulfed in our topic of the day, which is the diamond industry overregulated? And so there are many layers to that question, more so than I actually thought, because one or two of my followers reached out to me on this topic, which hasn't really happened in previous debates. It's something that obviously the industry thinks about, and they and those were unanimously that we're underregulated, which I was kind of surprised by. So we'll talk about that, and see how it goes. By no means providing solutions, but we're stimulating discussion here, and that's the whole point. So with that, I want to firstly, as always, give a shout out to Sarine Technologies, who supports this Diamond Debates series. For over 35 years, Sarine has asked the industry's big questions, providing advanced AI technology to drive the diamond sector forward. Imagining a more efficient and more innovative industry is central to Sarine's DNA and essential to long-term growth across the entire diamond ecosystem. And so that brings us to Feriel. Feriel, welcome. It's great to see you. Thank you for joining our debates today.
Thanks for having me, Avi. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, it's an important one, because there is a feeling within the trade, I think, that we are overburdened by audits and different regulatory requirements that sort of stifle the industry. But then, as I said, and these weren't really traders. For full disclosure, they were kind of people involved in the regulatory environment who were quite adamant that the industry is not scrutinized enough, if that's the right word. So let me start off by asking you the question, is the industry overregulated? What is your position on that?
So when you reached out to me with the topic, I think my immediate response was, I love it. And I took some time this last week to ask different people their opinion around my network. And some are in the industry, in the diamond industry. Some are not in the industry. And, the responses that I received were, comprised of like the total opposite sides of the spectrum. No, I don't believe it is. To we are quite a lot regulated. And I took some time to reflect on those answers. And I think that, those that say that we're not regulated are often those that are not in the industry or not trading. And those that say that we have a lot of regulation are those that fall in a category that they're not only in natural diamonds, they're also in colored gemstones, for example. And then the ones in between are only in natural diamonds, and they'll say, we have a lot of regulation. What was really interesting was that none of them said we are over regulated. They just said it's too regulated in comparison to other luxury products out there. And so when I took some time to think about it, so, full disclosure, I didn't speak with anyone that is from the regulatory sector, but I did speak to, neighbors and friends who are not in the diamond industry. So let's call them consumers, right, of diamonds. What I found interesting was that, diamonds are seen as a luxury product, but they are not simply a luxury product. They are, in addition to being a luxury product, they are a geopolitical commodity. They are a source of wealth. They are a natural or mineral resource. And so they fall into these different categories. And in these different categories, they're captured by different policies and regulation. And so in the natural diamond industry, over the last 25 to, let's say, 30 years, different layers of regulations have been added throughout these nearly 3 decades. And that's what has created quite a lot of regulation. And why it feels burdensome for those that are in the trade is that there is this total lack of cohesion or unification of these different regulations. So you often feel like it's quite repetitive, it's audit heavy, it's costly, and you're being asked, very similar information for different agencies. And I feel that that's where the actual problem lies. So I looked into it, and I've written this down so I don't get it wrong. A small parcel of natural diamonds that could be worth, I don't know, a few $1,000s. It would be accompanied by the following documentation. So we start with a Kimberley Process certificate for the rough, sanction compliance requirements, for the Russia-related sanctions within the G7 regimes, customs declarations and origin rules, anti-money laundering checks. From an industry perspective, you may need an RJC, Responsible Jewelry Council certificate, or your best practice principles report. You'll need your WDC system of warranty on each and every single invoice and the self-assessment that accompanies that on an annual basis. You'll need your due diligence requirements and your beneficial ownership disclosure. And then add to that, from the financial sector, you'll need bank compliance and source of fund checks, insurance verifications, traceability requirements if you're doing business with certain retailers that require traceability. And so the ironic thing is, for a small parcel of diamonds that could be worth, a few $1,000s, you will need more documentation than a large shipment of technology worth millions of dollars. That's
I was going to ask if that's comparable to anything, because it's more than I anticipated. It sounds like a lot.
It is a lot, and so it is a lot. But but I feel like the only reason why it feels like it's a lot is because of the lack of unity around all of these different layered regulations that have been created at different times in the last 30 years, without actually looking at what already exists or what industry self-regulation already exists, and just pointing to that so that we could have a unified approach. But if you were to look at, as I said, if you want to compare it to the colored gemstones, and I'm not an expert in colored gemstones, but for those that are working in both, they've said to me it's like night and day.
Well, let me ask you, how much of that list is self-regulation?
So in that list, it is only the Responsible Jewelry Council, the system of warranties of the World Diamond Council, and potentially the traceability requirements from the retailers.
And how much of the other stuff is coordinated, or is standardized? Or is it's all coming from different sources?
From different agencies, different sources, different policymakers. And so, it's interesting that, that some might think, it's not enough and we need more. I fear that because there is no sort of bird's eye view of what's actually already regulated, that feeling might be as a result of that, but not just that feeling, the result of all of these different policies and regulations not being connected into one comprehensive framework is the result of that. And I mentioned my neighbors and my friends that are consumers. The funny thing is some of them have said to me, in the past, they have said to me, I don't feel comfortable wearing a diamond. That's why I've bought a ruby or a sapphire. And the irony of hearing that when you're in the industry where and I'm not saying that colored gemstones are unethical at all. I'm just saying there's far less regulation and far more trust basis, and actually it's a much more fragmented industry with much more artisanal mining involved, much more fragmentation at source, many more countries involved. So the irony of it, is that this fragmented approach on the policy side has made it really difficult for us to actually tell consumers a simple story on
Right.
what ethics a diamond stands for.
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that the diamond industry and the product is under greater scrutiny than those other gemstones and articles of the used in the jewelry industry. Um, I just it does raise the question that you bring, whether it actually has an impact on consumer confidence, because the whole purpose of it is to protect, well, protect certain elements of the trade. If you think about segments of the industry are that are protected within those regulations, you can think of the artisanal mining sector, the cottage industry, whatever it is. But I would say primarily it's geared towards the consumer to ensure that they have confidence that the diamond is ethically sourced and has gone through, the right channels. And so it speaks to your point that there is some irony that it's maybe not doing that job, and that would feed into the idea that it is overregulated, that these regulations and requirements of the industry are not doing what they're intended to do, and that's inspire confidence in the product. Or maybe it's just a risk management issue that, in which case it is. In the case of a question being posed on the diamond industry, we can point to all these measures that we're taking.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last time there was a consumer confidence crisis in the industry was when the issue of blood diamonds arose, and that was in the late 90s. And at that point, NGOs like Human Rights Watch did a great campaign that connected the consumer really to the risk and the crisis, because they were able to determine that the trade in rough diamonds was actually funding some of this conflict in Angola and Sierra Leone. But that is a long time ago, and I think that the Kimberley process has actually addressed that risk when it comes to diamonds, and so the industry really went from what that handles that risk. What else can we do? And developed many mechanisms to bring in the rest of the supply chain and also regulate the industry, because the KP regulates the government, not the industry. And what is really interesting is that in today's age, when I go and speak in panels in the US, in retailer countries, let's say, a lot of the retailers in the room would raise their hands and say, Feriel, nobody asks me about blood diamonds or conflict diamonds or where this diamond comes from. Nobody asks me about this question. And I think that it's true because, I've done mystery shopping myself, and I'm an ultimate consumer of luxury products whenever I can. And, when I go to buy a bag or something, I'm not asking them about the leather. I'm so excited about, the experience of buying that bag. And the reason why is because, frankly, with a product of high value in today's age, it is expected. It is expected that you are taking care of your supply chain, that your product is one that represents certain values. And from a consumer perspective, you're not engaging with the supply chain. You're engaging with the retailer or the brand that you're buying from. And so that retailer's values or the brand's values that you're purchasing from, you are making the assumption that the product that that retailer is selling represents those values. Sure. And that's why it's very fragmented in its approach. But I do believe it's also as a result of so much different regulation, a complicated storyline. We do so much in the diamond industry. You know, how do you simplify the story and make it a unified approach towards the consumer? So it's there to, you know, from my perspective, because it's expected, and really the actual impact of it isn't really felt at consumer level. It's felt at trade level, so B2B. You need to be able to do this to do business and participate in the supply chain, especially if you're focused on growth.
Yeah, I mean, two points I'd make in response to that. The first is that, you know, we always say that it's better for these regulations to be industry led, you know, rather than the you know, came up with the issue of sanctions, whether the industry should be developing these traceability programs and adopting them so that when the regulators come into the picture, they see what we're doing and accounting for our diamonds anyway, and fit into what the industry's set up already. And I think actually the industry doesn't get enough credit for that type of work that it's done, being maybe a step ahead of regulators, or at least trying to be. You know, it's not so easy. And so I think, you know, and I think that's led by the brands, because they are very sensitive to those to that vulnerability of their brand being tarnished by any negative storyline associated with them or their product. And so I think that, you know, the particularly the luxury jewelry brands, the high end, have been very instrumental, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, in driving these this accountability which which the regulatory environment would or should fit into if it's industry led. Would you agree with that? Is that a fair assessment?
Partially, I think in what is unique in this industry is usually in other industries, it would be the brand that would be the only player that is driving this type of change. But in our industry, the producers actually, so the bookends have both had massive roles to play. So from, you know, if I think about the best practice principles when I was working at De Beers, in a world where it is the supplier that says to its customer, if you want to purchase from me, you must participate and comply with the set of standards. The De Beers was actually, you know, the first in doing that, and De Beers is largely a producer. You could also argue it's a retailer, but it is the only mining diamond mining company in the world that has the same brand name at consumer level, and that carries huge responsibility. I also believe that the brands have a huge role to play and have had a huge role to play. When we got together to create the Responsible Jewellery Council,
Right,
it was the producers and the brands, the bookends, that got together to create and heavily subsidize the creation of the Responsible Jewellery Council. And again, that's unique in our industry. Why? In the diamond industry. Why? Because there is a very small number of producers, unlike the colored gemstones, for example. So you've got a small number of producers, you've got a much bigger number of brands, all wanting the same thing. And then what you have in between the two bookends is a mixture of large, medium, and small businesses, formal sector and informal sector, but all equally important to the health of the trade. And that's why, you know, both bookends need to be working together to uplift, but also uplift in a manner that doesn't leave smaller guys behind.
Well, that's a further point, but I'd agree with you, and I think De Beers was able to do that because the producer end of the market is or was at the time not fragmented. That De Beers had such a dominant role in influencing various aspects of the market, and in particular policy. You know, and I think it was. I think it saw the writing on the wall after the financial crisis, that particularly in the financial disclosures that were required of the industry, that the industry couldn't operate the way it had in the past, that it needed those disclosures and needed the correct reporting standards, etc. And I think from that, De Beers sort of moved forward with, I mean, you were involved in the best practice principles, but to my mind, the financial crisis kind of really accelerated that De Beers push to raise the regulatory compliance standards of the industry. So that's the first thing, and then I think the RJC had a big, or has had a big role to play in the adoption of such compliance standards across the board, because you had those bigger brands saying that we're only going to deal with companies and suppliers that meets the standards that we require, and the RJC saying that RJC members should really deal and do business with other RJC members to ensure that a certain standard of compliance is met. And so, it's it is from both bookends, but then it does leave the question if there is a whole chunk of the market that's being left behind, because because it creates this kind of small circle of people doing business with each other and B, because it's, as you said, by that list, it can be overwhelming, all the all the things that are required of a company. So I do think that there is, those small mom and pop retailers and dealers and manufacturers who are just like, what do we do? It's an extra expense. Our margins are tight anyway, and it's overwhelming. I don't know where to start with all of this stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, my view is different, a little bit different when it comes to regulation that's been created by government versus regulation that has been created by industry. So the best practice principles that De Beers created, they were actually created straight after the implementation of the Kimberley process. So we were focused on the KP in 2003. When the KP started being implemented in 2003, the De Beers group launched the best practice principles, which would take care of all of the social, environmental, and business integrity risks that we believed existed in the supply chain from mine to finger at the time. Obviously, these have evolved over the years. But that program was proprietary to De Beers and only applicable to its clients and their contractors. And so De Beers being such a large player, most people said, well, that's not good enough. If you're a large player, you're only taking care of your supply chain. And that's incentivized De Beers to come together with other retailers who had their own programs. And, the guys in between were saying, gosh, this is too much audit fatigue, expensive, etc. And so got together with other brands in the industry to agree on that one set of comprehensive standards that would be applied not just to the De Beers supply chain, but open to everyone to use. And De Beers and other players heavily subsidized the creation of those standards with one purpose. It was to be able to incorporate the smaller players into this fold. And so everything that they could think of, like, having the lowest possible entry fee, I can't remember at the time how much it was, but being a member of the RJC, I'm going to get this wrong now, but was a few $100s if you were a small player on an annual basis. Really lowering the barriers to entry, but going through the same teething problems as De Beers did with the best practice principles. So if you have a comprehensive set of standards and it's applied to a group of companies, if you get the same questions and you're a mining entity or a huge, department store, and if you get the same questions as a two-person office trading in polished diamonds in Antwerp, then it's burdensome, right? It's crazy. You can't be answering all of these questions because your business profile and your business risk is very, very different. And so what De Beers did at the time was create a mechanism called the smart system. And through technology was able to create from that comprehensive set a customized set of workbooks applicable to your business profile.
Right.
And that's where the RJC needed to go next. And when you make it fit for purpose and relevant to the business, it doesn't feel burdensome. So an RJC, to me, if I'm a large mining entity certificate, would require a totally different level of work from an RJC to a two-person office in Antwerp. That's what we mean by comprehensive and fit for purpose.
Right. Okay. So in a way that levels the playing field to some extent.
That's the objective. That's the objective. But there's always room for improvement. There is always room for improvement. And with De Beers, we started the smart system, and the second that started, the clients were very thankful, and actually looking forward to a relevant audit, because good players see it as a health check. These types of industry regulations are not used to punish the trade. They are used to improve the trade.
Right. Right. I mean, that's it's a statement that I think many in the trade might argue on. that again, because there is this kind of sense that one gets overwhelmed by. I mean, I have form phobia. I just going to the doctor for me is like an overwhelming experience, because I've got to fill out my medical aid form. But another issue I think that's coming up in this space is, again, apropos a level playing field, is that in the United States, and particularly under the Trump administration, it seems that there's a shift away from such a micromanagement of regulatory requirements, and particularly with regard to ESG requirements. And in Europe, they sort of still plowing ahead. And I think there is just generally a sense that Europe is more regulated than other parts of the world. And this, they're working on bringing additional ESG requirements and reporting requirements to their format, whatever it is. And so, is that something that affects the trade at all? Or is it just a global community that we're all dealing with? Diamonds flowing through this network, that it doesn't really. It affects us all equally.
It does. It does affect us, because it's a very small number of players that will only trade in the EU or only trade in the US. We are actually quite interconnected, and there's this trade flow where we're all connected. And so, yes, you're right. In Europe, we're seeing a more formalized policy framework with ESG reporting, and it's quite descriptive. And then in the US, we're seeing a more enforcement type mechanism, where it's focused on sanctions and it's focused on tariffs, and so if you're a player and you're a global player connected to the EU and the US, you will find it quite painful, because even if you don't need to comply with it and you're not based in the EU or the US, you will need to comply because you're connected to that supply chain.
Yeah.
And that fragmentation is what creates costs. It's what creates friction. It's what raises, barriers to entry for new entrants, because it has become extremely expensive to comply with so many different types of regulation. I think when, to your earlier point, the government, the reason why the industry was really engaging hard with government when it came to the import restrictions, not the sanctions, because the sanctions are a totally different topic. Government's role is to impose sanctions. It is, the it is the country's sovereign right to be able to set sanctions on products or companies or countries. What government isn't used to doing is being so prescriptive on traceability systems, and you set the law, you set the regulation, and then the industry develops its own mechanisms to comply with the law.
Yeah.
This is what took us by surprise this last time. And so as long as government continues to set the law, continues to set regulation, and allows the industry to develop their own mechanisms to comply with that regulation, then I think that mechanisms that are harmonized will be developed by the industry, because we want to do both. We want to do business, we don't want to impact trade flows, and we need to comply. But when government becomes so prescriptive on the how, that's when problems arise.
And that's what's happening in the EU with the ESG requirements. Is that what
Yes.
you're saying? Yeah.
So even before the US took a different direction, we believed that the US and the EU were going towards the same direction when it came to ESG under the previous administration. And so what we were focused on was trying to make sure that the reporting requirements were going to be the same and unified across the two, so that one business just did one set, would develop mechanisms internally, systems, management systems, etc., so that it could comply with both. That was our biggest concern at the time.
Right. Well, I think in this case, then you take the stricter approach, and you comply with the one that's
if only, Avi. If only, Avi. So unfortunately, it doesn't work that way, because it's about it's about the metrics that a government recognizes, or the government might
they
say,
focus on water and they focus on electricity.
No, they will both focus on water and electricity, but it's how they want you to measure it. So basically, you would need to then develop two internal systems that would, because you don't want it to be manual, right? That would capture the same information, translate it into two different frameworks. As you mentioned, I think earlier on, your form filling for medical aid. Imagine having to answer the exact same questions in two different ways.
Yeah.
For the same purpose, and having to do that consistently, not on just your one topic, but also when you're paying your bills, or also when you're buying your food shopping, or it becomes quite burdensome.
Yeah, and it seems I don't know much about the details of what the EU regulations are going to require, but it seems that it's going to be tiered. So they're going to be requirements for companies of a certain size, and different requirements for smaller companies, etc. Maybe that's the regular practice. But I wonder if the industry is not, and if this isn't on the industry's radar enough, because it's coming into the what's it, 2028? I think that they're talking about.
Yeah.
Whenever it is, but it doesn't seem to be in the industry conversation. And the industry does, individual companies do their work and whatever it is, and I think the brands are very much aware of what's of their ESG compliance, be it because they want to meet the regulation, or because it's good for their brand, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter for our purposes. But then again, you're going to come into that nuanced conversation where they're going to expect the same from their suppliers. And so those, just as an example, those RJC standards are going to be raised even further, encompassing what the ESG compliance in the European Union and in the United States is going to encompass.
So the conversation is being had, so under the RJC umbrella, because that's really where the mandate is
Yeah,
for
yeah.
ESG reporting, and the RJC's got a subcommittee called the SDG Task Force. I used to chair it before I left, and um, you have
Sorry, are the SDGs
representatives.
still relevant? Are they still a thing?
Yeah, so I mean, it's all connected. The Sustainable Development Goals are goals, and the ESG reporting frameworks fall into, the metrics that would help you measure your impact in these areas. And so, within that, there is a task force that started focusing on the ESG frameworks. And it mapped one of the pieces of works that I think it published last year or the year before was it mapped all the different frameworks and created a tool, a simple tool for smaller players to be able to understand what already exists and where are the commonalities and where are the differences. And so if you're a small player, to be able to get that work done, you'd need to hire someone in, or you'd need to bring in a consultant to do that work. That was actually done within the RJC and provided as a tool for free for its members and non-members to
Yeah.
be able to use, because it's about a journey. So it's not a compliance requirement. The RJC's got its compliance and its core documents, but it's also got these toolkits to start getting members to be more aware of what's coming. And within that task force, quite a lot of work has been done to ensure that, at least from a trade perspective, we are not going to be asking for different templates to be filled out.
Right. That's good to hear. Okay.
So one midstream guy is not going to get 20 different templates from retailers on what to fill out. Let's agree on that one template. And if that alignment happens, you then have an industry position that you can use with the EU government to say, we as a trade, in support of your regulation, have agreed on this. Would this work for you? That's how it should work.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I hope that message sort of trickles down again to the non RJC members, and that there is some sort of a way for them to fit into this to into this environment. Before we end, I actually want to there was another regulatory aspect that someone texted me about when this topic came up, and that was with regard to how the market works. In terms of trading, in terms of price discovery, things like that. And I actually hadn't thought of that in the regulatory sense. And I was curious what is that something that you've my feeling was my response to this person was that the market regulates. The market forces regulates price levels and trading levels, and they brought, I think, they brought an example from the gold industry, and again I felt like it doesn't need a regulatory body to regulate trading. And what are your thoughts on that? Is there a gap in the way we operate in that sense?
I mean, I don't understand what they would be looking to regulate. I think from my perspective, a regulation serves a purpose. And in terms of, understanding who you are going to be doing business with, you then do due diligence. If you need to be able to understand whether, banking, like the source of funds to comply with your banking requirements, you would be asking for the ultimate beneficiary information. Regulating in terms of pricing, I think I don't even understand.
Well, yeah, I mean that brings us to some dangerous territory. But I
Yeah,
think what the point was that and this was my response, that with gold you have a spot price for and that gives guidance to your wholesale and retail pricing if you're just trading on gold. If you're selling by weight.
yeah.
and you don't have that sort of commoditized element of diamond trading. And
I
so,
mean, you're
it's,
absolutely right. You can't refine diamonds into one nice little block of,
yeah,
certain quality and create a price. But there are price lists out there. There's price indexes out there for
right.
polished diamonds, right? Um, I I just don't think that that's the thing that gets regulated as a consumer product. Gold isn't just a consumer product, but as a consumer
Yeah,
product,
yeah,
your value is basically the value that a consumer wants to pay to buy you, right? And so
right,
we
right.
need to be creating demand, not setting the price. Many other commodities out there are not consumer products, and if they are, it's a very tiny volume of the production that's a consumer product. But we are, again, the complicated facets of a diamond, a luxury consumer product. And we need to be creating demand, and demand sets the price at consumer level.
Yeah, I couldn't. I mean, we'll certainly agree on that point. I think there is, we started with this discussion referring to the consumer perception of how diamonds are trustworthy, and I think there is an interesting sort of a tension that the industry is dealing with in its messaging at the moment, because it kind of wants to lean into that and say, look how good we are, and how how ethical the industry is, and the great story and the great good that the diamond does. But then it's not actually a very good marketing strategy. you know, I mean, I have this argument with others who are trying to, accentuate the Botswana story, etc. But the American consumer wants beautiful design and sexiness and edge, and a great piece of jewelry, and that's what sells, and aspiration,
I think you're right on that front. I think that you just look at the largest marketing businesses in the industry, the big brands, and they market the jewelry piece, they market the beauty, and they market their values, right? The values of the brand. But they demand origin. Again, they demand origin, they demand, because that's what their brand's values represent, that they do due
yeah, but
diligence, they know
that's
where their product comes from, that they,
yeah.
you know. So there's a front facing consumer marketing side, and then there is the supply chain needs, right? That and compliance requirements also, because if you're going to comply with ESG requirements, how can you comply? How can you report on impact if you don't know where your product comes from?
Yeah,
So
I mean, it's a matter of, it does reflect the values of the brand, and I wouldn't question that. I'll give every brand the benefit of the doubt in that sense, but it's also very much so a risk management thing, because of those because the regulations and the regulatory environment that requires it of them. But also, if there is a crisis in their brand, or if there's a question, that bad news spreads very quickly, and they need to um, have those boxes ticked to answer to it.
yeah,
So
I
yeah,
mean, if a consumer comes in, doesn't know where diamonds come from, thinks, has this image of a bad image of where diamonds come from. Botswana is a beautiful story. Namibia, South Africa, Canada, Angola, all of these areas are where the majority of the diamonds come from. And actually, the businesses that have incorporated in those countries give so much back in terms of their own social initiatives, but also the governments that are running those countries, like in Botswana,
yeah.
have a wonderful story to tell. So I think because we have such a lovely story to tell, we are tempted to tell the story.
And we
I
should.
think,
I'm not
and we want to
advocating
tell
not
it,
to,
but it's
but
so complicated.
yeah,
So
yeah,
we need to
yeah.
find a way of simplifying that storyline so that a consumer immediately gets it. When you say natural diamonds, they immediately understand ethical.
Absolutely. We'll leave it at that, on that upbeat message to the industry. Feriel, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, and always insightful talking to you. So I appreciate you joining me today. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Avi. Always
Thanks,
a pleasure.
everyone.